It was the first time I had ever lived alone. After 22 years under my parents' roof, I had finally saved enough money to rent a small house in a quiet suburb about an hour from the city. The house was a bit old, but the rent was almost unbelievably cheap. The landlord had explained that the previous tenant had to move out in a hurry for a job relocation. I remember the day I signed the lease. The sun was bright, streaming through the old windows and onto the floorboards. Everything felt so full of hope. Moving day was a Friday. After a full day of work, the moving truck drove away just as dusk was setting in. I was exhausted but filled with a sense of accomplishment. The house was cluttered with unpacked boxes, so I decided to put off organizing, treat myself to a hot bath, and get a good night's sleep in my new bedroom. The house had a single main floor and a small attic. The access panel to the attic was a square wooden hatch on the ceiling of my bedroom closet. I didn't think much of it at the time. The light in the bathroom was a bit dim, and steam quickly filled the air, shutting out the darkness outside. I placed my phone on the sink, put on some calming music, and slid into the tub. It was as I closed my eyes, enjoying the rare moment of peace, that I heard the sound for the first time. It was a very faint, intermittent scratching, seeming to come from the ceiling. My first thought was squirrels or mice. It was an old house, after all, so a few critters would be normal. I tried to ignore it, turning the music up a little louder. But a few minutes later, the scratching stopped and was replaced by a dull, slow-dragging sound. This sound was different. It wasn't something a small animal could make. It was more like something heavy being dragged across the floor. My heart skipped a beat. The sound was coming from the direction of the attic, moving slowly, deliberately from one end of the house toward my bedroom. I turned off the music and held my breath. The entire house fell silent, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the faucet and my own, increasingly loud heartbeat. Fear, like a cold vine, began to wrap itself around me. The dragging sound stopped directly above my bedroom. I shot up out of the bathtub, shivering as the water dripped from my skin. I tiptoed to the faucet and turned it off, wrapped a towel around myself, and quietly locked the bathroom door. It was an old-fashioned knob lock. I knew it wouldn't hold against any real force. I pressed my ear to the door. Outside, there was only silence. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, I tried to tell myself. It's a new house. I'm just not used to the sounds. Just then, a distinct click came from the bedroom. It was immediately followed by the sickening creak of splintering wood. The source of the sound was the attic hatch in my closet. My blood ran cold. Someone was in the attic, and they were trying to pry open the hatch that led into my bedroom. Panic washed over me in a suffocating wave. I wasn't imagining it. This was real. There was another person in my house. He had been there the whole time, right above my head. While I was moving in, while I was taking a bath, he had been up there. I looked around the small bathroom. The only window was high and narrow. There was no way I could climb out. My only escape was to go through the hallway, past my bedroom door, to the front entrance. And the person in the attic could come out of my bedroom at any second. I could hear the sounds of him prying at the wooden hatch growing more frantic, punctuated by low, guttural grunts. He was about to break through. I was out of time. Taking a deep breath, I turned the lock with a trembling hand. I was naked except for the towel, which felt like it could fall off at any moment. I pulled the door open just a crack and peered toward my bedroom. The closet door was slightly ajar, and a fine powder of dust and wood shavings was drifting down from the ceiling. It was now or never. I burst out of the bathroom, my bare feet slapping against the cold floor as I sprinted toward the front door. I kept my eyes fixed on the exit, not daring to look back toward the bedroom. Just as I reached the living room, a loud crash erupted behind me. The attic hatch had been forced open. It was followed by a heavy thud as a person's feet hit the floor of my bedroom. A scream I didn't recognize as my own tore from my throat. My fingers were stiff with terror as I fumbled with the damned deadbolt. I could feel the footsteps rushing toward me from behind, getting closer, louder. Adrenaline surged through me. I finally got the lock to turn, threw the door open, and ran out into the cold night air. I didn't look back. I just ran down the street, screaming, until I reached a house with its lights on and began pounding on their door with all my might. A kind elderly couple called the police. By the time they arrived and cleared the house, the intruder was gone, having escaped through a back window. But what they found in the attic makes me physically ill to this day. In a corner of the attic, there was a filthy sleeping bag. Beside it were several empty water bottles and discarded food wrappers. Heavy drag marks scarred the dusty floor, leading from the far corner to the hatch above my bedroom. The police said he had likely been living up there for days, maybe even before I moved in. The most horrifying discovery was a small hole drilled through the attic floorboards, directly above where I had placed my bed. He had been watching me. He watched me carry in my boxes, watched me set up my new bed, watched me as I slept. The house with the unbelievably cheap rent, the house where the previous tenant had left in a hurry, came with a predator already lurking in the shadows. I never went back to that house again. I had friends pack up my belongings for me. Even now, whenever I'm alone at night and I hear the slightest noise from the ceiling, I wake up instantly, my body cold with fear. Because I know that sometimes the safety and privacy you think you have is just a fragile illusion. You never know what's watching you from the darkness you can't see. We moved into the new house just before Christmas. It was supposed to be a fresh start. My wife, our 5-year-old daughter Lily, and I had been living in a cramped apartment for years, and when we finally found a place with a yard and an extra bedroom, we jumped on it, despite how oddly cheap it was. It was a single-story ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood just outside Boise. Nothing fancy, but it felt like ours. The previous owners left in a hurry. There were still some boxes in the garage, but we didn't mind. Moving is stressful. We figured they'd come back for their stuff eventually. The only thing that made me pause was a door in the hallway. It looked like a storage closet, maybe 5 feet tall, with a rusty old padlock bolted across the outside. Not something you'd see in a modern home. I asked the realtor about it, and she gave a vague answer. Said it was just a crawl space. Previous owner had some bad wiring in there, so they locked it to keep kids out, she explained. Made sense, I guess. We had Lily after all. Still, something about it felt wrong. The first night, after we finished unpacking the essentials, Lily picked her room and went to bed early. My wife passed out right after. I stayed up, winding down with a beer and some late-night football. At around 2 a.m., I was woken by something. A voice. Faint and childlike. I sat up in bed, straining my ears. "Come play with me." It sounded like it came from the hallway. I rushed to Lily's room, but she was fast asleep, breathing steady. I checked the windows locked. The baby monitor was on and silent. Maybe I imagined it. Moving stress. Lack of sleep. I went back to bed, unsettled but rationalizing. The next morning, Lily was unusually quiet at breakfast. When I asked what was wrong, she just looked at me and said, "The boy behind the door doesn't like loud voices." I nearly dropped my coffee. I asked her what she meant, and she just shrugged. "He's nice," she said. "He just wants someone to talk to." I asked her where she heard that, and she pointed down the hall, right at the locked door. I didn't know what to say. My wife brushed it off as imagination, but I knew Lily. She wasn't the type to make up stories like this. She was sensitive, observant, quiet, too quiet. Over the next few nights, things got worse. We'd wake up to hear Lily talking in the hallway. We'd find her sitting cross-legged outside the locked door, whispering. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" my wife asked one night. "Jacob," Lily said. "He lives in the small room. He says you locked him in." That night, the temperature in the house dropped so fast we could see our breath. The heater was working fine. I started sleeping with a flashlight and a crowbar by the bed. The turning point came a few days later. I woke up to the sound of something scraping. I followed the sound into the hallway and saw it, the locked door. The padlock was on the ground, open. The door was cracked an inch, just enough to see darkness inside. The air pouring out was cold, wet, like the air in a meat freezer. I called the police. They came, checked the crawl space. It was just a dusty little room. Dirt floor. Cobwebs. A few scraps of paper and what looked like a child's drawing, pinned to the inside wall. The officer bagged it as evidence. He didn't say much, but before he left, he asked me, "You ever see your daughter with a red crayon?" I said no. He nodded, eyes tight. "Might want to get a priest or something," he said under his breath, half joking. I didn't laugh. That night, I spent hours researching the property. 2 families had owned the home before us. The first family had a son named Jacob, who went missing in 1996. Police suspected the father, but never charged anyone. Then a fire broke out 2 years later, and the home sat abandoned for over a decade before being bought, flipped, and resold. No one stayed long. It hit me like a punch to the chest. Lily had never heard that name before we moved here. Jacob. The next morning we packed. Told Lily we were going to visit Grandma. She didn't want to go. Said Jacob would be lonely. As we pulled out of the driveway, I looked back at the house. The hallway light flicked on. The door at the end of the hall, that door was wide open. And I swear to God, just before we turned the corner, I saw a small figure standing inside the doorway, watching us. We never went back. We didn't take any of the furniture. Didn't even list the house for sale. I still have the drawing the cops let me keep. A stick figure of a little boy standing in front of a house, drawn in red crayon. There's another figure behind him, just a black scribble with eyes. Underneath it, in shaky handwriting, it says, "He only talks to me when the door is closed." I moved into my new house on a rainy Friday afternoon. It wasn't anything special, just a small 2-bedroom place built sometime in the early 90s, tucked into the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. I got it for cheap, suspiciously cheap, but I chalked it up to luck or maybe the real estate market tanking again. Either way, it was mine, and I was eager to start fresh. By the time I finished unpacking the essentials, it was already dark outside. The rain had picked up, hammering against the roof in waves. I made a sandwich, cracked open a beer, and sat on the old recliner the previous owner had left behind. That's when I first heard it. Drip, drip, drip. It was faint but rhythmic, coming from the basement. I figured it was just a leaky pipe, or maybe the rain seeping through some crack in the foundation. I grabbed my phone flashlight and opened the basement door, only to be hit with a wave of musty, cold air. I stepped onto the top stair and flipped the light switch. Nothing. The bulb must have burned out. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to ignore it. I was exhausted, and honestly, it didn't seem urgent. I shut the door and went to bed. I wish I had gone down there. That night, I had the strangest dream. I was standing at the top of the basement stairs, peering into the dark, but I wasn't alone. Something, was standing just out of sight at the bottom, whispering my name. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just watched as a pair of wet, pale feet slowly stepped into the light. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:17 a.m. The rain had stopped, but the house felt unusually quiet. That's when I noticed it. The carpet outside my bedroom door was damp. Not soaking, but definitely wet. I turned on the hall light and followed the trail. There were footprints, bare, slightly muddy, and leading straight from the basement door to my bedroom. I stood frozen for a solid minute before forcing myself to check the locks. Everything was still bolted. No broken windows. No sign of forced entry. I even opened the basement door again. Still pitch black. Still that smell. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, determined not to be the paranoid new homeowner, I decided to finally check the basement. I bought a new bulb, screwed it in, and braced myself as the dim yellow light flickered on. The basement was ordinary. Concrete floor, some exposed insulation, rusty old water heater, and boxes left by the previous owner. But as I stepped down, the air grew noticeably colder. And then I saw it. In the far corner near the floor was a dark puddle. I walked over, expecting a leaky pipe overhead. But there weren't any. The ceiling was dry. I looked closer at the floor, and that's when I noticed the footprints again, leading from the puddle straight toward the stairs. Just like before. But these weren't fresh. They looked stained, almost like they had been there for years, somehow preserved in the concrete. I turned to leave but caught something in the corner of my eye, something tucked behind an old cardboard box. I pulled it out, a tiny water-stained baby shoe, white with a yellowed sole. Next to it on the wall, written in what looked like red crayon, were 3 words. "Don't come down." My chest tightened. I backed away slowly, ran up the stairs, and slammed the door behind me. I didn't go back down there for weeks. I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe a sick prank by the last owner. Maybe I imagined the footsteps, the dream, the wet carpet. But every night since, I've heard it. Drip, drip, drip. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I hear something else beneath it. Like a voice. Faint. Repeating my name from somewhere deep underground. I've sealed the basement door now. Bolted it shut. But I still hear the water. And last night, when I walked past the hallway in the dark, I slipped slightly. The carpet was wet again.